It can be easy to forget after watching the series spend decades basking in the global spotlight, but unlike most of its toy anime contemporaries, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was not originally conceived as a means of shoveling merch down the throats of gullible millennials. Before it inadvertently spawned one of the most powerful media empires of the 21st century, Kazuki Takahashi's only goal with Yu-Gi-Oh! Was to tell a story. A really weird story that somehow only got weirder as it mutated into the marketing monster we know today. Yu-Gi-Oh! In its original form was a crudely rendered Shonen Jump horror manga about a meek Japanese teenager who solved an ancient Egyptian puzzle and was subsequently possessed by the angry spirit of a long-dead pharaoh. That dark ghost exacts vengeance on those who hurt his host by being really good at analog games. And when I say analog games, what I really mean is murder with extra steps. Okay, to be fair, sometimes the Egyptian revenge ghost only punishes bullies by driving them to permanent insanity with dark sorcery, but he just straight up kills a heck of a lot of them. Like that one, admittedly kinda justified time he tricked an escaped convict with a gun into soaking himself in vodka and lighting himself on fire to save Teia's life, or that other, slightly less justified time he challenged a classmate to a game of air hockey but on a hot okonomiyaki griddle with a puck made of ice and explosives to settle an argument over which class would get the best culture festival booth. Also, this one guy dies because a perverted talking baby shits in his lap while he's hooked up to a real-ass electric chair on a haunted house ride, which is part of the extended version of the first episode of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime, where instead of just kidnapping his grandpa for cardboard, Kaiba builds an entire indoor theme park solely to murder Yugi as revenge for beating him at a card game once. This, you will soon see, was not a waste of 10 billion yen, or approximately $100 million, but rather a phenomenally forward-thinking business move. After that arc, it's said, kids started writing into Shonen Jump asking where they could learn more about Duel Monsters or even play it. And in that avalanche of letters, Jump and Takahashi saw an opportunity to potentially make the next Pokemon. After a pretty kick-ass send-off arc that introduced Bakura in a massive tabletop RPG showdown for the souls of Yugi's friends, they gave the manga a soft reboot, making it entirely about the card game. We all know how this turned out from a business perspective. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is one of the most profitable media franchises in history and closely trails Pokemon and Magic as the third most popular card game in the world. But from an artistic perspective, this business decision did some profoundly wacky things to the story and world building in particular of Yu-Gi-Oh! Any plans Takahashi had for his characters and world had to be reworked to focus on Duel Monsters, and the sudden shift from a scattershot board game of the week formula to a heavily serialized narrative about a single game meant the mangaka had to make a lot of shit up as he went along. A lot of people like to focus on the ridiculous rules he came up with for Duelist Kingdom in particular, and boy, some of those sure are silly. The infamous catapult turtle gambit is really just the tip of the iceberg, but to me, that zaniness pales in comparison to what happened to the series setting. Takahashi had to find a way to take the visual excitement of monsters coming to life in shadow games and make it a universal aspect of the series, or else it would just be a lot of dudes dramatically placing paper on tables. He couldn't exactly give every character a Millennium item without completely changing what he had planned for the manga's ending, so instead, Kaiba Corp's solid vision hologram system had to become a ubiquitous part of the setting, and it had to happen frighteningly fast. The original version of Yu-Gi-Oh! Was set in real-world Japan, or at least a lawless facsimile thereof, where our teenage heroes could be physically attacked on a near-daily basis by bullies who want them to listen to bad karaoke, fake fortune-telling rapists, random street thugs, violent sneaker bandits, an escaped convict, a solid terrorist, a TV news producer doing a special on bullying who apparently couldn't wait the half hour it'd take for one of those other guys to show up, corporate goons, and random street thugs again, but this time with yo-yos. It was, in case I didn't make this clear enough already, a gloriously weird manga, and it continued to be gloriously weird long after its Pokemon-inspired pivot. But it was at least somewhat grounded in the recognizable reality of the late 90s, until suddenly, in the space of just a few months, we've got an island full of massive holographic arenas, or less massive holographic glass battle boxes in the manga's case, which are replaced just a few months after that by compact satellite-linked arm-mounted card game computers that can project monster holograms anywhere. They also conveniently allow Kaiba Corp to spy on anyone in the vicinity of a dual disk anywhere within the range of those satellites, which I'm sure would be pretty controversial if anyone ever found out about it, but Kaiba manages to keep that gross violation of privacy secret forever, which is pretty true to the horror roots of the manga, actually, and also a fairly prescient depiction of a tech billionaire for a story written in the year 2000, though Seto Kaiba actually invents the things he sells, so obviously it's not one-to-one. Kaiba, mostly driven by a desire to win a card game against one guy, accelerates the technological development of the entire world to the point that the series goes from being a work of dark, Egyptomania-fueled contemporary fantasy, Stardust Crusaders with slightly less punching, basically, in spring, to a full-blown proto-cyberpunk dystopian nightmare by fall. As an aside, that cyberpunk story still leans heavily on horror-tinged Egyptian mysticism, which makes for a metal-as-fuck genre mashup. Goofy hair metal, to be sure, but metal nonetheless. And that blend lends itself to some pretty great filler arc concepts. In what other anime would you see evil corporate executives exacting vengeance for their termination via VR MMO isekai, alongside a story where an ancient Atlantean cult is stealing souls to resurrect their eldritch god? I mean, yeah, episode to episode, these arcs are a drag, they completely ruin a lot of characters, and dropping one of them in the middle of the Battle City finale was an odd choice, but the underlying ideas there are really cool. I digress, though. Kaiba and Kaiba Corp are absolutely terrifying by the series' end, but to fully understand how they got there, we must also look at the meteoric rise of Maximilian Pegasus and industrial illusions. See, another interesting and short-lived aspect of the Yugiverse in 1996 is the fact that people in it do things other than play the only game, like read comics or watch pornography. On VHS, by the way. They were still using VHS tapes when Kaiba invented holograms. Duel Monsters is already a big hit in America by the time Kaiba and Yugi first square off in the manga. Like, about 10% of the entire US population circa 1996 plays it, which perhaps explains how Pegasus was able to buy a whole island and build a castle on it. But in Japan, at least, it's still just taking off, and people still play other games, like Pop-Up Pirate, Rock'em Sock'em Robots, but with monsters, chess, but with monsters, not Virtua Fighter, and not Digimon. By the start of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist in early 1997, though, every other game has all but vanished entirely. Duel Monsters is all anyone does or talks about ever, and the lone attempt we see to launch a competing game, Dungeon Dice Monsters, goes up in smoke almost instantaneously. In the anime, not even the direct backing of Industrial Illusions can help Duke Devlin's odd fusion of D&D and Chinchiro take off. Nobody wants to play anything but Duel Monsters. The game becomes so ingrained in pop culture, practically overnight, that by fall that year, nobody bats an eye when the entirety of Domino City is taken over by a Battle Royale tournament. And by 2004, professional Duel Monsters is apparently a viable enough career path to support a cutting-edge private dueling academy with hundreds of students that also gets its own island. For perspective, we only started seeing esports school in like the last few years, and all of those cover multiple different games. The implications of this are clear and, frankly, terrifying. After achieving a near-total multinational tabletop gaming monopoly in, at most, the 6 years between Pegasus taking the Millennium Eye and Duelist Kingdom, Duel Monsters just kept expanding, picking up more and more players and fans, spawning more and more jobs for pro players, game designers, and accessory manufacturers alike, until it became the dominant force of the entire global economy, not to mention global culture. Now, it's reasonable to say that this isn't entirely down to the game's success as a game. Duel Monsters is, after all, a modern revival of real ancient Egyptian magic, itself derived from an even older tradition lost beneath the waves of time, that allowed its practitioners to summon spirits, gods, monsters, and demons born from human souls to do their bidding, and which could, in its most potent form, pierce the very veil between this world and the next, plus some other worlds besides. Those reality-warping properties eventually turn the cards into a key component of the Enter-D system, a synchro-summoning-driven perpetual motion generator that can power an entire city the size of Tokyo with plenty of energy left over to fuel card games on motorcycles. So, to be fair, there are more practical applications for Duel Monsters that go some way toward explaining its increasingly undue influence on the world around it. But to be balanced, all of that was discovered a long-ass time after Industrial Illusions achieved its simultaneous economic and cultural victory and fundamentally rewrote the rules of human society. The fulcrum of all of that economic leverage was just one card game. Perhaps a supernaturally addictive game on account of the ancient soul magic. I would love to see the televangelists of Yu-Gi-Oh's America freaking out about that, but still, a card game. Even back in 1997, the Big Five, seasoned executives who built their fortunes through more traditional, non-card-based industrial wage and rent theft, could already see the writing on the Wall Street. They conditioned their sale of Kaiba Corp to Pegasus entirely on the already unfathomably successful CEO's ability to win one duel against one child. And then, when he didn't, the whole bajillion-dollar deal fell through. Which turned out pretty well for Kaiba Corp in the long run, if not for those five guys specifically. Under Seto Kaiba's renewed stewardship, the company saw continued growth and success, which only makes sense given that Seto was the one with the foresight to pivot their whole business toward game and card game accessory development, a choice that made the company exponentially more profitable than it ever was with its old business model, which was, arms manufacturing. This act signaled the beginning of a swift end to the old military-industrial complex that had defined the 20th century. In its place arose the new trading card industrial complex that would similarly shape the 21st while causing similar amounts of human suffering until Yusei Fudo solved wealth inequality forever by getting one bridge built. Am I perhaps making a mistake by so closely scrutinizing the economic logic of this series? No, definitely not. Thanks to their head start in the gaming industry and a close connection with Industrial Illusions forged through Kaiba's early Duel Monsters tournament success, Kaiba Corp was able to ride the peak of that wave of change all the way to the bank, and then buy that bank and the bank next to it. Like, holy shit, they have so much money, it should be illegal. Also, it should be illegal to have far smaller amounts of too much money, like all billionaires are parasites, but it is fun to talk about this harmless fake one.
The next time you catch yourself wondering about the great marvels of the universe, and who's responsible, you'll have an answer. Better yet, a name. And that name is... Seto Kaiba!
You know how, at the end of Battle City, Kaiba built a big, stupid, expensive-looking tower on his dad's old military base solely for the purpose of playing card games on it, and then blew the whole thing up after playing 3 card games there just to make a statement? Yeah, that's barely even a flex for him. You probably expect me to point to the company's ownership of Duel Academy Island by the early 2000s as a sign of their immense success, but you need to understand that by that point in this story, private island money was chump change to Kaiba. The Dark Side of Dimensions movie is set in 1999, 2 years after the end of the original manga, and by that time, with 90s technology, Kaiba's able to completely finance the research, development, and construction of a space elevator and attached orbital platform that's shaped like his company's logo because fuck you, who's gonna stop him? This is in addition to the R&D money they were simultaneously spending to create a dimension-warping full-dive virtual reality system and developing fully sentient AI. Again, in a world that still uses VHS. And on that note, a significant portion of the orbital facility seems to have been built for the sole purpose of having one of those AI analyze the Millennium Puzzle down to a subatomic level and reconstruct it in a zero-G environment. All so that Kaiba could have one last grudge match against the Pharaoh and then definitely also do some other stuff with him after that.
It's true. I went to a great deal of trouble recreating the Pharaoh's deck, strategies, even his perfectly coiffed hair. In fact, that part is what took the longest.
Barring a level of embezzlement that simply does not square with the long-term sustainability of his company, this means Kaiba has space station wing money set aside for entirely personal projects a good 6 years before GX even begins. and he just keeps getting richer from there. A few decades later, Kaiba Corp has the resources to effectively remodel the entirety of Domino City, again, the Yugiverse equivalent of the world's largest city, Tokyo, into the fully dystopian Neo-Domino City that serves as the stage for 5Ds. Which is its own kinda cuckoo bananas, as is GX, but both were clearly designed as vehicles for Yu-Gi-Oh! As a product before they were stories, and there's just something about the strange confluence of genuine artistic intention and absolutely shameless brand exploitation we see in the original Yu-Gi-Oh! That makes its story and world feel special. In rising to meet the narrative needs created by an absurd and unprecedented economic opportunity, Kazuki Takahashi ended up building an absurd and unprecedented economy for his world. One that's only gotten more absurd as the series has continued in perpetuity and those needs have gradually overshadowed his original vision. Yet that vision of a dark tabletop gaming story driven by ancient magic and prophecies that is ultimately about the importance of the connections we make over the table still resonates in a very weird way. And after spending over 200 chapters selling pieces of cardboard with bits of text loosely inspired by the zany game rules he made up as he went along, Takahashi did get a chance to spend a year finishing the story he started, at least in some fashion. The final Millennium World arc of the manga is kind of a triumph. It returns the series' focus to magic and PG-13 horror and breaks away almost entirely from the hard rules of the card game, instead focusing on the more chaotic, unstructured ancient Egyptian monster battles that inspired it, which feel like a weirdly perfect intersection of Pokemon and stand battles. It also revisits the hands-down coolest non-TCG concept from the original Season 0 manga, realizing it on a grand new scale in a compelling and immersive manner only made possible by the years Takahashi spent honing his art skills on the weekly shonen grind. And when it does finally return to the card game for one last hurrah, it is a real hurrah. A tense, for once truly uncertain feeling back and forth duel with interesting, well-thought-out strategies and counter-strategies that speak to the distinctive playstyles and personalities of both players. A final reckoning between the timid boy who learned to be strong from the ancient hero who shared his heart, and the dark spirit who learned to maybe not murder so many people and also make some friends from a kind young man. It's a tight, personally satisfying ending for the characters that thankfully isn't influenced too much by the direction the rest of the franchise took, though in turn, of course, it doesn't have much influence on it. While Yugimoto and the Pharaoh were able to save the world from certain destruction at the hands of the Dark Lord Zork Necrophates, they were ultimately powerless to stop the Darker Lord, late-stage capitalism, from slowly consuming the society around them, leaving nothing but the only game and the holographic corporate surveillance network on which it runs. So when Yugi says he wants to make his own game one day in Dark Side of Dimensions, it reads as more tragically short-sighted than endearingly optimistic. He is unknowingly dooming himself to toil in fruitless obscurity, while, without his competition, Joey is probably looking at a decently bright future as a pro duelist. One of the only viable career paths that will be left in the coming years, but hey, let's cut him some slack. Like everyone who graduated in 1999, they really had no way of knowing. And I don't really know how to end this video beyond that depressing note, so fuck, marry, kill Kaiba, Yami Yugi, and Duke Devlin. Leave your answers and detailed explanations in the comments below, and if you'd like to watch a less existentially horrifying video about either card games or world building, check out the videos on the left side of your screen now. I'm Geoff Thew, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.